with David Morgan of silverinvestor.com on Currency Countdown this week, and we're doing a follow-up discussion on the Euro crisis. David, I am fired up this week. I am so tired of seeing my investment portfolio impacted by the Euro crisis, and I don't see any resolution in sight, even though they keep telling me we should anticipate one any day. What are your thoughts on what's happening?
Well, Tracy, I agree with you. I don't think there's anyone that's really stepping up and addressing the real crisis. And I think that's pretty obvious with what's happening. There is this meeting at the end of this week that is probably a make or break point. I know there's a lot in the space to talk about, the gold, silver, and the economic conditions globally that are saying, we've got 10 days or so and it's counting down. We have others in that space, such as John Nadler, that says apocalypse not now. John made some good points, and he's more establishment oriented than I am, but I think he's a pretty good thinker. And his latest article that I read, which was a few days ago, is that, there will be enough money injected in the system and things will carry on. My problem with that idea is that we're already in a debt crisis, and adding to that debt isn't going to help anyone. The other point that isn't brought up very often is one that Martin Armstrong brought up recently, and that is that they have a one currency system in the Eurozone, and that's true. But what did not take place when the euro was formed was the sovereign debt of each individual nation. For example, Greek debt or Spanish debt or Irish debt or any of those. So from a big perspective, from a bank-to-bank perspective, you could short individual currencies, and that's what's taken place. You could short the Greek bond, the Irish bond, the Spanish bond, whatever debt market you wanted. The ECB, the European Central Bank, has never come to the fore and said we're the Eurozone, and the Eurozone has its own bond. It doesn't. That's in discussion. But whether they're able to push that through and resolve this problem by putting this debt burden on the backs of everyone, it's impossible. The last thing, and I think most important, is that Germany is pretty much the de facto leader in this situation, and they obviously have the greatest GDP of all of the Eurozone. But there's no way that Greece, for an example, and there's others, could come out of this because they cannot match the output that Germany can. There's no way. It's not the population. They don't have the industrial base. So it's really best, in my opinion, that someone step up and really start with the truth and see if there's a way out of this that allows people to get out of the Eurozone and go back to their own sovereign currency. Now, I know that the leaders of that proposed and implemented the euro currency are not for that at all. But I think the individual nations, such as Greece, Spain, Ireland, et cetera, probably would be.
So, David, let's talk about the truth with the euro. And if you could extrapolate a little bit on this about what your truth is on the existing euro condition, and where do we go from here? What do we do now? What do you recommend they do?
The truth is that we have a debt burden that we cannot get out of. That's the truth. Now, what is the correct solution to that problem? I don't know exactly, but first you got to admit you will never work your way out of this debt. So one solution would be to downgrade the debt, which is what happened in Greece recently. Basically, the official downgrade is 50 cents on the dollar. That helps. It certainly doesn't help the people that owned it at face value, but at least it's truthful that this debt can't be paid back. You have to accept 50 cents on the dollar. That's the official downgrade. The unofficial downgrade is greater than that. So that is a solution. Certainly it doesn't make both parties happy, but in a situation where you cannot pay back the debt, you have to own that truth and you have to resolve it one way or another. Admitting that and having the counterparty take the lump because they believed that they could get full value and find out later that you can't pay it back. That's part of the investment world on a minute scale, from borrowing money from your neighbor you can't pay back to a sovereign nation that can't pay back the debt. So the principles remain the same. So that would be number one. Number two would be to stop it as much as you possibly can at this point in time and then move forward from there. To pretend that if you keep borrowing money, you'll be able to work your way out of it at this point is ridiculous. And I think that's a second point of the truth, or the truth the way I see it, that would be important to explain to basically not only the political structure throughout the Eurozone, actually throughout the globe, but also in each individual nation state.
You referenced the Germany on more than one occasion being the inevitable leader out of this crisis. What do you think?
Basically, Germany's the de facto leader, and the reason I use that term is because they have the highest GDP, they have the best industrial base, they're the most sound country in the Eurozone. I think France is partner and parcel to that from the aspect of a banking perspective, because they have bought so much sovereign debt through the other players in the Eurozone, and they don't want to see that debt become worthless, what we talked about a moment ago. So they're very, very concerned that they get the right influx of quote unquote capital so that they don't lose their shirts by doing these bad loans. So they are politically put in a position of where they're going to lead their way out of this, but really they are looking at it from more of a selfish perspective, meaning that they just don't want to lose all this money that they've loaned out in the past. They want to make those loans good. And that's rather selfish in a way. I'm not saying it's wrong. What was wrong is, as you said earlier, the idea that these separate entities, these separate, at one time sovereign nations, could all band together and have one currency when you have such a difference in ideologies amongst them, and you have such a different work ethic, and you have different industrial bases, and on and on and on. The reason the United States works well, relatively speaking, is that you have 50 states, but they're all allowed to work within their own context, and there's one unifying system, and there's one currency that was implemented so long ago. So the idea of the euro, in my view, and from the initiation of it was a very bad idea, and we're seeing that manifested now.
What is going to happen with the banks if they do actually proceed to save the euro? I see this being a negative move on their part because they don't have the money to pay the banks back.
All these banks in Europe, Societe Generale, Cosmos Bank, every one of these banks pretty much across the board in the Eurozone are hitting new lows. And so the market is explaining to anyone with eyes to see that this banking system is really up against it. And to put out more bad debt after the bad debt that's already out there is probably going to take some of these banks down even further. So the market is smart. The market will react to the reality regardless of what the political system is stating in public. The facts are that this thing is getting out of hand, and where it'll end, no one knows. But it's certainly looking like the crisis is getting worse, not better, based upon not only what we've talked about in this interview, but the banking stocks themselves are screaming insolvency.
So what is going to happen to the US dollar in the near-term future? Are we going up or are we going down?
Well, my best guess, and I want to use the word guess in this context, is that it'll go up. Because on a very short-term basis, the thinking will be euro no good, dollar good. And we've watched this tennis match go back and forth several times already, where it looks like the dollar's doing poorly, so people rush into the euro, people meaning large entities, banks primarily, hedge funds, etc. Moving into the euro strengthens against the dollar, and then it goes the other way, then it goes the other way again, and back and forth and back and forth. So I expect to see that again. Ultimately, though, meaning the currency system globally, whether it's the euro or the dollar, are all moving down against gold, and that will continue.
So you anticipate gold continuing to move north, is that correct?
It is, but not on a very short-term basis, but more on an intermediate-term basis, absolutely.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining me again this week on Currency Countdown, and here's to the 10-day countdown, something unexpected occurring that we didn't anticipate that's very positive, and leadership steps in and is dealing with the problems straight on, straight ahead, and coming up with some real solutions to this debt issue.